Before we start, are we expecting that the mayor will be joining us?
Good question. So the mayor let me know that she has a conflict and has to go to another meeting, so we will not be expecting her. But Tiffany from Pet and Gill will be here, and we are live and recording right now.
Okay, all right. So, so this is Judy Timon, and it is the December 3rd Affordable Housing Trust meeting. And we have Karen Weiner and Madeline Nash, members, Caitlin Sullivan, Andrew Port, staff members, and we are expecting that Suzanne will be here, I believe. So we might wait just a few seconds for her to join us, and also for our guest from Pet and Gill.
So Andy and Caitlin, is there a reason we don't get to see the real you?
No,
I've gotten into the habit of having my picture for these meetings when I have to be at home, just because with our other groups, there's so many people on. I've just found it, I like to just have it kind of private, not having a picture in my house.
yeah, well, I've done it periodically, but part of the reason I do it, it goes back to my original philosophy with the video stuff is it actually adds to the size of the video file we record. And I was concerned about data connection. So I just ended up doing the simplest thing possible. Originally, I actually had the city seal in there because I was thinking of it as a city account. But as things evolved, obviously, we ended up having sort of our individual profiles. So I changed it to a picture. But I have done that. It's just, it just seems simpler to keep it, as an image. So.
Okay. I'd like seeing people, but but I understand.
Just wanted to say, Judy, that Tiffany from Pet and Gill is here, and so is Suzanne.
Oh, good.
Hi,
Great.
sorry.
Hi, Suzanne.
Hi.
Hello.
Great. Okay, so first item on the agenda is the rental assistance program. So Tiffany, why don't we turn it over to you for an update?
Hi, Tiffany. I don't know if you can hear us, but it looks like you are.
I am.
Muted.
Sorry,
Oh,
I just saw that I was muted. Thank you. So the last time since we've met, we have approved 3 additional households. So the total to date is $37,714 for Newburyport rental assistance. Let's see, the 3 households that were recently assisted, we helped one complete a raft application. It was a Portuguese speaking family. So there was a lot of coordination between us and CTI and community teamwork. And we had an interpreter service, to get updated information from the family. So that was a success story. And we did have Rep. Calcourse office involved as well to help with some of the actually then referred to the congressman's office as far as some renewal. Because of COVID, there was some assistance that's needed for renewal so they can get some unemployment benefits as well. So a lot of collaboration, which is great. So this family, is back looking more stabilized at this point. Let's see. And then there's another family that the daughter's starting Head Start. So mom will be back to work. So again, more stabilization in that household. And then another one decided to leave the restaurant industry because of the instability at this point. So she has taken another job. And then we do have several households that are pending. There are a few that are, we're just waiting for a few additional documents to come through. There was one that has been on our pending list for quite some time because of her self-sustainability and looking for more affordable rent. She has since found a job, which she can now continue self-sustainability. So we'll be reviewing that once we get all the updated paperwork from the resident, and hopefully we'll give some final approval. Let's see, we do have several new applicants, which we're in the process of the initial screening part of, are they eligible under the Newburyport rental assistance guidelines, specifically more have they been affected by COVID? Because we've got quite a few that have come through that think because they're just a Newburyport residents that they're eligible. So we're just doing that initial screening and then looking at, you know, if they aren't eligible for Newburyport rental, are there some other assistance either internally at Pettingill House or within the greater Newburyport community that they can receive assistance? Because some have actually applied. It wasn't for rent, it might have been utility or car repair or some other assistance. So we're just working with our partners to help, you know, provide some financial assistance if they aren't eligible through this grant. So I know that I said initially, like, I wasn't surprised that right away we didn't have a big outpouring. Yes, there were some applications, but I knew it would kind of be longevity, like COVID isn't going away, that there's going to be families affected by COVID at different times. We've kind of seen it through the school as far as, you know, sometimes they've had to go from remote to hybrid. So families are being affected differently. Then there was the curfew. So some of the restaurants have been affected. So, I expect that there's going to be continued applications based on a need of an individual household within Newburyport. So I know we talked about outreach last time. I know Caitlin communicated with Sierra, our development director of development, to do more publicizing, which I know has happened. But I'm thinking, again, doing something as far as especially like the artists and restaurants, if they are Newburyport residents being affected, getting more out through the school as well, exhausting all avenues. So that's a quick update on this end. Any questions?
Just a comment. You might want to redact the names on this.
I know. When I looked, I had, yes, thank you, and I apologize. And I was like, I cannot believe, and that's why I named it internal, external. And in my error, thank you, I sent, unfortunately, the wrong report, and I will, yes, moving forward.
Thank you.
I mean, it sounds to me like the publicity has been good, in terms of getting the outreach, I should say, in terms of getting the word out. I don't know if not as many people are affected as we thought, or if they're trying to, use other resources first. I don't know, but I'm glad we're offering this at least. You're muted, Judy. Judy, I think you're talking, but you're muted.
It seems like a pretty steady stream to me, that the volume has been pretty kind of consistent.
It has. And I think that just from the applications, like some of it was initially like getting all the paperwork in place and, because we are requiring, a full bank statement, and we are requiring pay stubs. So some of that, but I think, some of these other applications that have come in as of recent, it's, they've tried to make it work and afford as much as they can, and they've kind of reached a point. And I think because of the moratorium ending, that they've reached out for help. And then some of it, that as far as, we've had some that have been involved with the school district. So ours were kind of inconsistent and remote. Some have been wait staff, so that, hours have been reduced. And then again, like the curfew, so they actually might have lost their job altogether. But yes, it's been a steady stream, and I foresee that happening, especially with winter coming and, things changing in the industries.
I had heard that the RAFT program might be trying to simplify their application process. Is this something other people have heard about? Because I feel like I've heard from other sources that this is a barrier to helping people, and that also the folks that are administering RAFT are just overwhelmed. So I don't know if anybody else has heard about sort of scaling back on some of the documentation that's being required.
Yeah, I know, have some insight into that, because I know CHAPA has been working with DHCD to try to streamline, and DHCD wants to streamline, but apparently the word is kind of coming from the administration that they're just really trying to make sure there's no fraud. And in my opinion, this is my personal opinion, they're erring on the side of making things more complicated to root out the few people where there might be fraud, rather than streamlining it and making it easier for most of the people who are applying who really need the help. But that's been kind of a philosophical issue, I think. So I think DHCD is trying to streamline more, but they are somewhat hamstrung and can only do so much. That's my understanding.
Well, one of the reasons why I asked was I don't know, Tiffany, whether you feel like there are barriers to helping folks because of the documentation that is being required for our program. I'm not suggesting anything. I'm just curious, like, if the state is going to try to streamline, it sounds like that's an open question. Is that something that we would feel we should be doing? Or maybe our program is not as rigorous as the RAFT programs in terms of documentation?
It's not, because it's not as rigorous. Let me put it that way. Obviously, it's, again, we don't want anyone to take advantage as well. So that is why we are requiring some documentation, that maybe necessarily we don't need an electric bill, because they have a lease, so we can see through their lease verifying their address versus like an electric bill. Same thing with like a photo ID. Not everyone has a license or an up-to-date license, because they may be taking public transportation, or their spouse or friend drives them to work. So, I mean, I think that the paperwork that's being required through Newburyport Rental Assistance is appropriate. As far as, we work with the landlord and we get landlord verification information, we're getting a W-9, we're communicating directly with the landlord, we're asking for their bank statement, because we want to see that there is a need, that if they're getting, especially in the beginning, if they were getting unemployment and it was the pandemic unemployment, were they paying their rent? Were they having good faith in paying their rent, right? And if not, like, what were their expenses that they weren't able to pay? So, and if it's a barrier because of paperwork, then we'll work with the the client to find out, like, what is the barrier? Can they not get to the bank? Is it, can we work with the bank and they fax it directly to us? So we try to really work with the client and break down all those barriers. And I think a lot of it, and yes, we're busy, we're inundated, but I think Raft more so, and they've hired more staff there, but I think that is very, like, everyone is applying, or mostly everyone is applying for Raft, so it's difficult for them to process all the applications that are coming through.
Okay, great. Thanks.
Yeah, one
When
thing,
is it? Oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, one thing I know that in the money that the governor put towards all this, they gave more money to the regional agencies like CDI to hire more people. So
Yeah.
hopefully that will at least help with the volume.
Yeah. And I mean, we're trying to, I feel like things have improved too with Raft, even the communication that because it was even hard to get a call back from them or some type of email response, but that's even improved on this end, specifically with the Portuguese speaking family, because at one point we were told they didn't have a Portuguese application. And I said, well, you have to have one. So we worked collaboratively with CTI and Community Action to get that in place. And like I said, we got the interpreter service in place. So again, we're just trying to break down barriers and really, get the needs met of the clients. So hopefully that continues moving forward, and that communication is, open.
I mean, you can look at it two ways, right? Oh, can you hear me? Sorry, this stupid headset. The good news is that perhaps Newburyporters are still in good shape, right? People don't need it. And then I'm wondering if the eviction moratorium expiration is going to kick some people in the direction of really starting to look for resources, if that indeed is happening to them.
I'm sure I'll have more of an update next month when that, because obviously the state moratorium was lifted. We have been providing, as well as I know CPI, the CDC moratorium, that they're presenting that to the landlord due to COVID, protecting them till the end of the month. So I'm sure I'll have more of an update if we're getting more of a request, because they're being presented with the 14-day notice or court eviction or from the landlord. So
Yeah, the thing that worries me the most, and I don't know, I'm imagining, Pat and Gil, that you guys do some PR around this or outreach, and I don't know if the city can too, but in my experience, once people get a 14-day notice, which now they can in a lot of circumstances, and certainly after the end of the year they can, they don't know their rights and the process, and they panic and they leave and they go like double up with somebody or something, and that's not sustainable, and they end up homeless. So to the extent we can, if there's a message to get out, that says something like, just because you get an eviction notice doesn't mean you have to leave. There's a process, and apply here for some help. I don't know if there's a way to emphasize that more, but I know that happens.
Karen, wasn't there an organization that was sort of pushing that that messaging in some form of a PSA? I can't.
Like the call 211?
No.
Yeah, I think the call 211 does mention that. That's true.
Okay. No, I just, yeah, it is, yeah, never mind. I have to look back at my records.
Even the flyer that, you're probably right, Suzanne, because even as I was saying it, I was like, isn't somebody doing this? But I couldn't think of who. But even like the flyer, I think that's going out from Newburyport looks really nice. And I wonder if there's a place in there that maybe add, even if you get a 14-day notice, still call us or something like that.
Yeah. And thank you, Karen, for mentioning that. Yeah, because we sometimes face that and it's too late and they've already left. So, right, it's educating them prior to a 14-day notice is for lack of a better term, it's like a scare tactic. There's not a court date set in place. And that's when we want to pick up the phone to the landlord and work with them and work with the client to really preserve their housing and come up with a plan, a payment plan or some type of agreement. Because that's what they're asking the client, the resident to do, the tenant to do is to come up with a plan to pay their rent prior to bringing it to the court system. So I know that there was a flow chart up there, and we work with the tenancy preservation for elders and disabled. So there was some type of flow chart to really, the visuals are the best. So we'll try to, I'll work with, again, Sierra, Director of Development, to come up with something, right, that says, like you're saying, Karen, so, right, if 14-day notice, like, please give us a call if you're in need of help.
Yeah, or even if you get a 14-day notice, please give us a call, or, you know,
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know, with the city, maybe it's hard to say you don't have to leave, although that's true, legally, you don't have to leave, but,
Right.
or some way to word it that don't just leave, call us, or
Right,
something
right.
like that. Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know, Caitlin, if that's worth maybe checking with the, you know, council to see if there's a way to word that they're comfortable with, but.
Because
I
there are
think-
some different stipulations, right? If it's a cause eviction versus a non-payment, yeah,
True.
there's
Right.
two different, yeah,
But regardless, whatever kind of notice someone gets, it's still the
Right.
first step in the process. It doesn't mean they have to get out the next day. So,
right.
yeah.
Unless the constable has a notice.
Well, right, if it's gotten to that point. That's true.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any other questions anybody has for Tiffany?
I just wanted to make sure I understood. So a notice is going to be going out to the school, to the students, or like posted on the school website, or I didn't understand what you were saying about notices through the school system.
So I think we'll work with Mr. Gallagher about, sending out something. So if there's a family that's affected by COVID, that they know. So we're just trying to exhaust all avenues for all Newburyport residents to make them aware that there is help available if the household has been affected by COVID and there's a rental assistance need.
Okay, thanks.
And Madeline, is Caitlin. I've been sending out the flyer and kind of posting it around town because it's pretty eye-catching to try and, just make sure people can see it. I think there's been like a still image put on Port Media of that flyer. So that kind of makes like a cycle. I don't know how often it's up there, but I think that's probably getting some good play too.
Caitlin, would you check with someone about adding a language, adding a line? Something
Yeah, we'll add a
about,
line to that flyer. That's a really good idea.
yeah,
Yep.
okay.
Yep.
Because I feel like that's what's not been happening so far, for the most part. That's going to happen more and more now. So,
Yeah. Caitlin, can you tweet that, or can the mayor tweet that out?
Yeah, I think it's been, I'm not quite sure. I know the chief of staff kind of every week puts out something about the program, and I think the mayor routinely mentions it on her updates as well. So I'll remind him to try and do that weekly if
Okay.
he can.
Yeah, thank you.
So thank you, Tiffany, for continuing to work so hard on this.
Yes, thank you very much.
I know it's hard.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Well, and I do have to say, like, there's, some recent family, like, just in tears, like, just so thankful that we're here, that Newburyport is, there to help support them and their families through this difficult time. One of the moms, again, the preschool mom, needed tires, and she was like, how am I going to afford rent and tires and get back to work? So, just very thankful residents that this program is available to help, really challenging times. So.
Good. Excellent. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Tiffany.
Thank you. Oh,
Okay, so next we have the youth services feasibility study update from Andy.
Yeah, thanks. So I happy to kind of give an overview, and then if you have any questions about what's been happening there, just let me know.
Andy, hate to interrupt, but I mean, I don't know. I know Judy and I were observing the reporting out or the forum or whatever we call it. I don't know, Karen and Suzanne, did you have a chance to participate? Okay. Well then proceed, Andy.
Okay, and again, it's a brief recap. I can pull up some visuals too if you want me to while I'm explaining what happened if you're interested, but it's they did a presentation. The consultants that were working for the city did a feasibility study for the Brown School, for the 57 Low Street property. That's a portion of the National Guard property that the city would acquire. We're still planning on that happening before the year end. But there was a possibility of youth services going there. So we were looking at both the Low Street site and the Brown School to see how youth services could be improved at the Brown School, obviously because they're already there, or move to the Low Street site, what that facility would look like, and what particularly important, what would it cost to do that, and kind of do a comparison there. Originally, I think the feasibility study came out of the mayor's interested in acquiring this property from the state and seeing if youth services could be moved there, given its proximity to the schools, where a lot of kids kind of get out after school and they would give them a place to go immediately. There was concern on the city council that we also look at the Brown School and see, design and cost wise, how it fits in there. Does it justify, retaining the Brown School as opposed to selling it, which is something that had been considered for housing a few years back. So I'm seeing a track at this point for possibly, the feasibility study was presented of both options in both locations. There was pointed out the obstacles to any use of the Brown School just because of the upgrades required. But because of the age of the building and the need, all the systems essentially needing to be updated. And then the Low Street site, there's really a shell of a garage. So that the assumption there was that building could be used for a good portion of the structure that's needed. And then the gymnasium and whatnot would be added for youth services. So it was kind of a comparison between both sites, the pros and cons, the costs. And that was presented to the general public and to council members who wanted to be there. The slides were posted on the city's website. I think I have to verify that. I don't know if it's posted yet, but we need to make sure the whole report that we got from the consultant is posted. But it's pretty lengthy. But the long and the short is, it seems like we're on track to purchase the Low Street property, but there seems to be some desire, at least from a few members of the council, to keep youth services at the Brown School, which has some bearing on what the possibilities are for the Brown School, because the scenarios we had looked at previously had contemplated the possibility of all 3 floors being devoted to housing, thereby making a project more economical and feasible for someone, developer or nonprofit, obviously, considering what it costs to do the upgrades. But given the track that there might be a desire to minimize costs for our youth services, wherever it's upgraded to, in this case, potentially the Brown School, that would potentially save the city a little bit of money on doing some minimal upgrades at the Brown, not necessarily give them a whole lot more better than what they have right now, but upgrading the standards a bit, fixing the heating system, for instance. But that would have a bearing on the housing project, because the upstairs 2 floors would be the only thing that's available. And it seems to me, based on all the conversations I've been involved with since I've been here with folks in the community officials, that there would probably not be much palate for adding an expansion, at least nothing of significant nature, to the Brown School. So what it seems to be on track for right now is some discussion about possibly only the top 2 floors going out for an RFP. And there has been some dialogue, although we don't know any details have been nailed down really. Interest in possibly working with the housing authority to see if that could be a good partnership. If youth services, for instance, stays on the first floor, with the entire first floor, except for a entry for the housing above, and the gymnasium area, that would be retained by the city. The assumption that maybe the housing authority could play a role in filling the housing need that's in the upper 2 floors. So, originally the assumption was youth services might move to Low Street. That was the hope, I think, originally with this feasibility study. And it does show that it's possible to do that. However, there are there's a proposal on the council to restrict some of the development potential on that lot, which would make it more difficult for your services to move there. So, that there is still a possibility at both sites, but it looks like it's tracking more for the Brown School for your services to stay there. And so if you're looking at projects for the Brown School or how your funds could help with that, what the options are, I think right now the scale of that seems to be 2 floors. And we are, Caitlin knows this, and I know I sent you, I think, some information on this, but we're applying for some funds, about $250,000 to try to help with the upgrades needed for the heating system in the building, which would help with the housing upstairs, because all that work would be prepping for any new runs that would be needed for housing upstairs. That would obviously have to be designed by an architect to make sure it maps out where we need it. But we thought that would minimize the cost for a nonprofit, say, who's trying to create affordable housing up there, whether it's the Affordable Housing Trust or any other entity. So at any rate, that's kind of a synopsis of where things seem to be tracking for the Brown School, which I think is your particular interest in that feasibility study and project. But let me know if you have questions. I'm happy to elaborate.
So a couple questions. Thanks, Andy, for the update. So first of all, the city is regardless planning to acquire the Low Street site, but not, I just want to make sure I'm understanding, but not necessarily, and maybe not at all, for youth services, for some other purpose?
Correct. And the state is agreeing to sell it to us for what they're calling general municipal purposes, which means any municipal purpose. But if we sell it to the private market, they have an option to take it back. That's the sort of terms. They're selling it to us at a reduced rate, sort of a governmental rate. So that kind of logically makes sense from their perspective. So the state is only limiting it to municipal uses. Again, assuming this sale goes through, because there's still debate over whether youth services could go there, the cost for both options and so forth. The expectation is still, I think, that the city council will purchase the property because it is a good value for the city, regardless of what it's used for. But it seems to me that in the foreseeable future, we're more likely to see the Parks Department continue to use it for their operations and storage, and other departments that have used it over the years, like the fire department, recycling or DPS occasionally, just sort of use it for storage and operations side of the city more so. So that seems to be possible there. And there's a proposal right now to, as soon as we acquire the property from the state, to essentially immediately put a conservation restriction on the rear portion of it, which would invariably reduce the development potential of that lot for any project, whether it's youth services or otherwise, because it's a long story. I could go into it in more detail if you want for wetlands regulations. I know Judy knows what I'm talking about, but it would add more restrictions than just the wetlands under the regulations. It would basically say you can't do anything back there in this portion. And so that kind of wipes out some of the NYS feasibility schematics. At least it makes it more difficult because you'd have to stack floors and build put an elevator, and possibly have less parking on site. So it makes it less likely that youth services could go there if that conservation restriction is put on that property.
So if youth services stays at the Brown School, is the city talking about acquiring or owning the whole building when you talk about the housing authority, or still putting it out for bid for development?
The Brown School?
Yeah.
Well, that'll be up to the mayor and the city council, obviously, at the end of the day. But from what I can tell, I know that Councilor Eigenman, who's, there's 2 ward councilors that kind of intersect where the school is. Councilor Eigenman obviously has one of those wards, and it seems to me he's particularly interested in retaining the Brown School. That came up a couple of years ago when we did an RFP for housing. And then there was a retreat from that to see what else, what the other options were and what we could potentially improve. He was particularly interested in retaining the Brown School as opposed to selling it. He wanted to lease it, for instance, if need be. There was a decision at that point, which was then we changed direction. But at the time, there was a decision to move forward with a sale for the market rate housing with affordable units within it, and youth services being retained, but essentially, improved by the developer as part of that arrangement. So the rest of the council, that remains to be seen what happens there. But it definitely, it seems to me that the scenario would be the city retain, at least from what I know right now, there would be at least a desire from one, the council president would be, I think, a strong voice on this. The track seems to be retaining the Brown School and leasing it long term, in whatever terms that might be, rather than actually selling it to another entity.
Got it.
It's, yeah, so.
And so process wise, sorry, I don't mean to dominate, one more question. Process wise, what needs to happen next? Like Youth Services, it needs to be decided definitively if Youth Services is staying there before any action would be taken on developing the upper 2 floors?
Yeah, so I think what needs to happen now is, frankly, I realize with COVID and everything else going on, there's been a lot of time and attention that the mayor and others have had to spend on different issues. And so, but I think my hope is that as we get back into after the holiday season into early next year, that I can circle folks back together again, and we can pick up the conversation before where we left off before the feasibility study, and have essentially a confirmation between the mayor and the city council and any other stakeholders as to is Youth Services staying at the Brown? Is it going to Low Street? What kind of money is going to be spent at either location? If it's the Brown School, what money is going to be put into the upgrades needed for Youth Services? What space is left for the housing units above, and having an architect essentially planning that out either for us, if it's for the municipal side, or having developers and nonprofits propose for whatever is remaining for the housing project. So the next step is for us to have confirmation of consensus over what happens with Youth Services now that the feasibility study options have been presented.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if there's any other questions about the study, or, like I said, I think I would stay tuned for, early next year, depending on people's bandwidth. I'd hope to circle everybody together and have a conversation about that, and, get confirmation for where Youth Services goes, because at that point, both Caitlin and I can actually track ahead on a particular project. It's obviously the Housing Trust is interested in the housing side of things, but for either one of us, whether it's an affordable housing project, or even market rate housing, or Youth Services, it's hard for us to actually get those projects going when the community's gone in a couple of circles over the years as to what it wants to do and what the program is going to be. So once that's nailed down, then we could track forward with remaining funding sources, specific design plans from architects as opposed to schematic plans, detailed architectural plans, utility upgrades, the way that they need to be done, where the lines need to go. The next piece would be more detailed design and/or an RFP on the street again for the housing entity.
What happened to the overlay? How does this impact that?
Well, right now there's a cap on the number of units. That's the primary piece I think that stands out to me about that ordinance. And unless the ward councilors are interested in modifying that, I doubt that the council would want to change the cap on that. Let's say the number of units. If nothing else, the ordinance basically specifies the terms that would be incorporated, or by reference, the RFP would basically say, here's the zoning today. This is what you're allowed to do. If you want to negotiate anything else, you're welcome to propose, but it's going to require a zoning change. So the assumption is that would be spelled out. And, if the city were to retain the building, for instance, and lease the upper floors, an RFP goes out for that, hypothetically, then the terms would be, unless the ordinance changes, the zoning provisions, any other terms the city sets for the number of units, or, parking required on site, and anything like that beyond what the zoning has even. The space, the details of anything else on the site other than what the ordinance change calls for, that we retain for the neighborhood and the improvements that would have to be done. So we'd spell out whatever terms were appropriate, for anything that had to be done by the developer or nonprofit, and then we put that RFP out on the street.
Do you sense you probably can't say this, but if you're reading the tea leaves, are you sensing a preference?
You mean with respect to the Brown School or Low Street?
Yeah, with the Brown School mostly.
Oh, with the Brown School.
Yeah.
Well, again, I mean, the primary or first consideration here seems to always stems from Youth Services, right? Because that really defines the remaining box left for the housing, right? So, I have to make the assumption right now that, where municipal officials are, the track seems to be to retain the Brown School. Youth services stays on the first floor, consistent with the feasibility study. Design monies are put together for the architect to do detailed design work now, have the bid the work, have the contractors do any work that's required for the upgrades, and get an RFP on the street for the upper floor component. And we'd have to be very specific at that point, nailing down how much of the first floor was devoted to landing and arrival for the upper floors. So we could then pin down the youth services portion of the design work and the RFP portion that's going out on the street for the upper floors of housing. I don't know if that answers your question, but I'm happy to elaborate. Or
no, I'm just, I don't know. I'm just trying to get a sense of direction and where the political will is, shall we say?
Well, I guess for me to give you some advice as to what might work best, if I had a better sense as to where you're thinking right now, I know where the housing trust was the last time we talked about the Brown School before the feasibility study, and where you were hoping to go as far as perhaps a more substantial percentage of affordable units versus market rate units, et cetera. I don't see, you'd asked about the tea leaves. I don't see, unless the housing trust is able to mobilize a lot of support for it. It's not clear to me that we're going to have, 100% affordability in the units, or, even 80% or so, it seems to me like that would be a smaller component, less than 25% maybe of the units would be affordable. But again, those are discussions we have to have. And I think the housing trust should weigh in when we go to the mayor and city council sometime next year and circle back and confirm what is happening with youth services, and then, after that or through that, what happens with the upper floors. But it seems to me that
about the housing authority, Andy, isn't that an assumption of 100% affordable?
Well, yeah, again, these are different options. The only one that has that potential is that I have heard of, in a recent time, other than as advocated by the housing trust, is the housing authority. Every other one that I've heard to date, other than what the housing trust has advocated for, has been primarily market rate, with some percentage of them being affordable. I guess the concern that I had expressed, I have expressed my thoughts for or against different things based on what I think is in the city's best interest the whole time with the Brown School and youth services. But one of my concerns for the housing aspect of the Brown School moving forward, regardless of whether it's the housing authority or some other entity, is just that by shrinking the amount of the building space that can be used for the housing project, it increases the sort of overhead costs that someone's going to have in trying to get that project to work. And given the need for all the systems in that building to be upgraded, and basically everything, I presume a lot of gutting to be going on while the area is being redone. It seems like there's a substantial amount of money that would be needed for the housing units. And that being the case, it just made me a little bit concerned that if the project is not of an order of magnitude, that's the right size, that it makes it harder to make those units and makes it harder to make the units affordable. So they more likely would have to be market rate, for instance, potentially. So again, it seemed to be more feasible to do the housing adaptive reuse when the whole core building could be reused. If youth services stays and uses, the majority of that first floor and the, gymnasium space, then you have a smaller project. And so my assumption is that we'd have, a little more difficulty at least getting that project to be viable. But you're right that the housing authority could provide an option for 100% affordability. And, again, everybody's got to input into what makes sense or what doesn't for the Brown School. We haven't seen any details as to what that arrangement would look like. And I think all of you were all here at the time of the when the RFP went out. So you saw what developers were proposing at that point, or nonprofits were proposing at that point, and what was a possibility, and what the officials were deciding to do at that point based on those proposals.
Oh, that's really informative. I would, I guess we'll talk about this as a group later, but I would still, despite the unit count and affordability, I would still advocate for 65 plus in there. Just, what I mean? It's just a population that needs to be served, whether it's moderate income or low income or what. But that's just I'm just free thinking here.
I think it's unfortunate that it's being considered to have a conservation restriction at the Armory. I mean, if the city's going to buy it, then the city can control what happens there. And I don't know why it would want to tie its hands any more than they have to. And it sort of reminds me of what happened at the Brown School with the zoning overlay. So I just, I can imagine the motivation, but I think it's unfortunate. And I also wanted to say that there weren't a lot of people who spoke at the public hearing. But what I sensed was that the parents were more enthusiastic about having youth services developed at the Armory. Is that, and I also, my recollection was that the analysis in the feasibility study was that, both options were sort of the same cost. It sort of depended on you had different levels of redevelopment and different options for both scenarios, but that at the end of the day, the Armory wasn't necessarily more expensive than the school.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I there may be one or two on the council who disagree with that study or the findings or whatnot in that report, but that definitely is the findings of the architects. And again, they were asked to do an unbiased analysis of both sites. The Brown School has a lot of retrofit that has to be done, a lot of things that don't meet code. So there's adjustments that have to be done there. It does cost a bit more depending on how complex the building is and how old it is. It can cost more to do a retrofit than it can to do a new construction on a vacant site. So you're right about that. That's sort of where they come out in terms of numbers and so forth. I have heard more support from the youth services side. Anybody who's on that end of the spectrum, with kids to saying that the Low Street side is better, and from their perspective, as far as location, I assume that also has to do with the location of the schools across the street. But again, that decision is ultimately made by both the mayor and the city council. Your comment about the wetlands on Low Street or the restriction on wetlands on Low Street, I do not recommend, and I've already noted in several council meetings and others I've talked to that I don't recommend putting a restriction on that property immediately upon buying it, thereby restricting every future potential city use without any options whatsoever, without legislative approval, state legislative approval. That's the only way that could be undone. That to me seems unwise. If it's not that the city's a developer, but if the city was a developer, you wouldn't immediately tie your own hands with your options, regardless of what the use is. It's going to go there. If you're going to decide whether it's NYS or something else, you debate about that project particularly. But again, this restriction would make it more difficult to do something there, because it would not only protect the wetlands in their present form and keep someone from getting an allowance under the state regulations for moving essentially 5,000 square feet of those wetlands somewhere else in the lot to make space for a building footprint or parking or whatnot. It would not only take away that option, but the proposed boundaries, and again, this is coming from one of our counselors, but the proposed boundary of that CR, conservation restriction, would actually grab some of the upland areas as well within there and further forward at what we call the no disturb area, and also some upland towards the rear. And so what happens then is it's not, that area isn't available either for modification in the future, even though currently under the regulations, the Conservation Commission can and has, say for the Department of Public Services, when they did a little building down there on Perry Way a couple years ago, there was an allowance given because it was a public project, had a public purpose associated with it, that they were able to essentially retrofit or relocate some of those wetland areas to make the footprint make a little more sense and make it more feasible. In this case, that would really preclude a lot of that. It would basically make that impossible. And then what's left over is really kind of pushed towards the street. In fact, the CR boundary, even though it is still the no disturb area around the wetland, as proposed, it actually grabs part of the parking lot as it exists today, and that sort of pushes everything that's possible in the future up towards the street. So you'd see basically nothing back behind in the tree areas and the landscaped area behind it. You'd see nothing forward of the building or the parking area, ever in the future. So
yeah, it just seems like for some there seems to be some motivation on the city council's part to force youth services to be at the Brown School, and it's not about cost, it's something else. And in also to restrict the future potential development at the Armory site. And, you know, it just seems like there's a lot of stuff going on around these two properties that doesn't have anything to do with responding to the need for affordable housing for our low-income seniors, or really listening to what the parents at youth services want. That's just my sense of it. But
Yeah, I mean, outside of the housing trust, and I say the housing trust, I really mean, any distribution of emails we send with meeting information or these actual meetings. Most of the discussion we hear about, youth services or the Brown School is not focused on, 100% affordability. So I think if you really, as trust members, if you want to see something more substantial happen there at the Brown School, whether it's the whole building or percentage of affordability or level of affordability, I think you need to both yourselves and mobilize any advocates for affordable housing, and that obviously needs to be sustained until some decision is made about the Brown School, because it does not seem to me that you're going to get the what I remember the trust saying a few years back, advocating for a higher percentage of affordability and possibly lower AMI, for instance. I don't know if there's any other questions I can
That's
answer about
helpful,
that,
Andy.
or
Thank you.
Andy, I just have a question about the grant. Is it a capital funding grant? Is that the one you're thinking about going for under the housing initiative?
it's the mass housing choice.
Mass housing choice. Okay.
Yeah, Caitlin, I'm reviewing a draft that Caitlin had put together in a little more detail. She's working with Nancy London, our grant writer. I actually owe her a review of the document, but there's an application basically, like I said, to try to get $250,000 towards essentially, because we know that one of the major issues there with that building, and one of the first things that could be done before anybody can do any finish work on anything, is fix, with the heating system, distribution system, and the water, to basically have those lines upgraded. That's a major kind of first thing that someone would have to do. So the idea there is to try to get the architect to put together details for that. But it would not make sense for us to engage that architect to detail that out for us and then spend money on the construction with those funds until we can confirm how much of the building is available for housing and what the layout might be for units, so that we're not wasting our time and money on that. We can leverage state money, but to make it of use, we have to be a little bit more clear about what we're doing with the Brown School and what portion of the building is available, because it would not make sense to spend. First of all, the money would be for the housing side of the building, so we have to nail that down. And so we have to kind of clear up exactly where those boundaries are first. But getting our grant in there, if they approve it, which makes a lot of sense to me, if the units are going to be created at the Brown School, then once we confirm what portion of the building is being used for your services, we can mobilize that money towards it. Maybe the housing trust could put money towards what's happening there, but it would help to improve the affordability of making those units affordable upstairs.
So the grant would have to be, it sounds like you're saying the grant would have to be used if only after it was decided what the housing component would be.
Yeah, so I mean, again, so what I'm saying is that youth services needs to be, there needs to be a decision about whether youth services is staying there, and if it is staying there, where is the boundary? Where are we cutting the boundary for what's available for the housing? Because that really determines, for instance, where we're having a separate utility room. Are we retaining the current utility room and having separate runs for different separate spaces for the different uses, youth services and housing component? We have to, the building is run on one system right now, so we have to basically separate these things, and so we have to have a demising line that the architect can work with. Otherwise, the design work for any kind of upgrades we could do to help the housing side of the building doesn't make any sense. We have no scope of work for them. We can't tell them exactly where we're working with. We can't determine the layouts of units to figure out how that would make sense. You know, even if it's putting a fire suppression line in there, you know, it'd be helpful to know where the fire, you know, the designers are going to have to know how we might be laying things out. So we have to have some kind of indication as to what's happening with youth services. That is then right now holding up what is happening with the Brown School for potential market rate housing or affordable, you know, and could be for some time, depending on whether decisions are made about youth services and the timeline for that. You know, I've been here for 10 years, and you know, that the building was only transferred to the city like 8, 9 years ago. And that whole time that I've been here, there's been several studies done at the Brown School, but we haven't quite gotten to any definitive place.
But that, maybe this is what you're getting at, Judy. The housing choice money is to support the development of housing. And youth services also needs a new heating system, but you're not saying the housing choice money is going to fund a new heating system for the benefit of youth services.
No, correct. And that,
space,
right, correct. And this is one of the complexities of that building is essentially we'd have to parse out if we're going to use only that money, if the city council is not appropriating money for youth services there, which is an option, you know, whether, again, if they stay there. If the city council does not appropriate any funds and there aren't any other sources of funds, obtained for this project, we would then only have the 250. And right now, based on the architect's estimate, that is the cost of that system. For instance, that aligns well with the grant program as far as the cost and a basic component that the units would need, you know, regardless, that distribution system. You know, we would only be able to do that, both the design and the construction of that component servicing the housing units, not the youth services component, which is the municipal portion, you know, which is a non-housing, you know, component. So yes, it would have to be parsed out for that. But again, we would not be able to mobilize and make logical use of those funds until we can confirm how much the building is available for the housing component.
I just, you know, I mean, I think it's a little like putting the cart before the horse to redesign a heating system for housing when you don't even know if it's going to be home ownership or rental, whether it's going to be 1-bedroom units or multiple bedroom units. You know,
yeah, I don't disagree. I guess there's two things to say with that. One is, you know, the mayor, you know, for good reason, I think was interested in pursuing these state funds, given that the city, you know, qualifies for at least, you know, for application review. That was part of the desire, I know, to go after those funds. It was, you know, it was clear that it was a little bit difficult as to clarify exactly what those funds would be used for initially. We were looking at the feasibility studies, the prior and the current, and realizing that there was an alignment between the grant amount that's available, the maximum that's available through this program, and what it would cost to do that. So it made sense to propose that be what we're using the funds for. It may be that as we go forward in the coming year, you know, as we're, you know, if they provide the funds to us, if they offer them to us, we might have a debate here about what those funds are used for in terms of the housing units, and they might agree to allow that to be used for, you know, the adjustment there. I doubt that they would care about that. However, again, we still need to nail down exactly what portion of the building is, to your point, we have to nail down more details for what portion of the building is being used for your services or housing. Yes, that's true. If we get to next year and there's no clarity on that issue, I agree that we can't really make effective use of those funds. And it would sort of bring question as to why we went after the grant funds if we didn't, you know, clear that up. So we clearly have to clear that up in the time frame of this grant program and in short order, because, you know, as Caitlin knows, with this grant round, you apply for the funds, you have to use the funds within a certain time period. So, you know, the bottom line is you're right. We do have to make a decision and in short order in order to make practical use of those funds within the grant program. Right now, it is not clear, to your point, how much of the Brown School will be used for housing. It seems to be, like I've said, on track for the 2 upper floors now. And so the only thing that we could see aligned very clearly for this grant program, given the time frame and the details we know, you know, that architects have provided to us and cost estimators, is that heating, you know, distribution system essentially. So so we would then, again, we would use those funds to have someone design something that makes sense regardless of what happens. If the upper 2 floors are being used for housing, regardless of the below or the lower levels, So whether that ends up being an exchange, set of units upstairs that are self-contained, or whether it ends up being something that's run downstairs again and there's a separate area set off for the housing units for their utilities. Yes, to your point, we would have to nail that down. But making this grant program work relies upon us making a decision about youth services so that we know where the architect is doing their design work and where the utility work is being done. And if you're concerned about that issue, it's perhaps one thing to, as you're talking with others, or whether you're talking with the mayor, you're talking with councilors, or you're talking with other parties that have a role in this, to remind them that without a decision being made about youth services, the housing end of it can't be done, right? So one, there needs to be a decision about one right now, because youth services is in the building. It's not on another site, and it's a question. It's actually in the building. So we really can't do anything until we confirm where that boundary is. So if you're concerned about that, and in terms of the time frame or any details, feel free to talk to others. I've identified these things as timeline type issues. We'll talk more about that. The mayor and I will obviously talk more about that, and the council will have to consider that when they think about youth services. But I don't know what that time frame is for making decisions. It's we have the COVID situation. There are budget issues at the local, state, federal level. I don't know, and that sort of tracks behind because of the way that the tax revenues come in a year. So I don't know where that puts us as far as bonding for youth services, whether that's for the lower level in Brown School or at the Low Street site. But based on the project costs, it would be bonding, right, that they're spending money on. So yeah, I mean, we could go around over the same issue, but there definitely needs to be a decision about youth services for us to move forward with the Brown School in any respect.
So stay tuned for that, right?
Yep. And so Caitlin and I will obviously circle back when we have more info, but like I said, I think, mid to late January is probably the earliest we're going to see any kind of meaningful discussion, about, making a decision now about youth services. We just got the feasibility study. Folks are digesting it. We've seen certainly some debate about its merits by members of the council. We had the public hearing. So we'll have to see what happens, but I wouldn't expect, based on COVID and the holiday season and everything, we're talking mid to late January before we get any kind of meaningful discussion of that. And that would require, somewhat of a lengthy process of a few months at least. Even if money is going to be appropriated, there's going to be decisions about that. That often requires something going to council, going to committees, coming back again. It can take weeks or months, for that kind of thing to be resolved. So I'm just talking about the initiation of that conversation again, in January. I'd like to see it sooner, but as I would have, a couple of years ago. We have to do. The community itself needs to make these decisions, and the elected officials, with the other stakeholders and the members of the community have to make a decision. And hopefully that will be done, early next year, so we can move forward in one track or another.
Okay, any other questions for Andy? All right, thanks, Andy.
Sure, no problem.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So on to planning office updates. We have a few things we need to discuss here. The CPA application. I also, with regard to the Foundry, I know, Caitlin, you're waiting for an actual letter from DHCD. Is that right?
That's right. Yep. You saw that email I sent. DHCD is a little reminder that we're waiting on that letter to, I guess, like officially kind of end this eligibility, this, this time frame to market the unit, and then something that says, that, should the seller, decide to sell again, that there'd be a whole new marketing period. So
Right.
we're waiting on that letter.
Yep. Okay.
And I guess, yeah, I provided a few other updates. I think a lot of them you're aware of, but two that I thought we should probably touch base on today is the CPA grant, which is the cycle is started and it ends beginning of February. So we should probably talk about if we want to submit an application. And then Judy, I don't know if you want to talk about the 6C zoning ordinance email that you got from one of the planning board members. I'm not quite sure if you wanted to talk about that, but I know we at least should nail down perhaps a CPA grant scope if you do want to do that, because I don't anticipate we'll probably meet end of January, and that'll be pretty close to the February deadline.
Right, right. Yeah, so let's talk about CPA. I don't know if
Yep.
anybody has had any chance to think about, what we would want to apply for this coming year. I don't have any, I've not had any brainstorms lately.
What about reimbursement for our COVID assistance?
That's what I was
program?
thinking. Yeah.
And maybe planning for some future demand.
Mhm.
It wouldn't be a huge request, but seems like that would be an obvious one.
How,
Go ahead, Suzanne.
go ahead. No, I was just, and I don't know why I haven't thought about this in a long time, but how is the community grant program going for, that we implemented for turnover,
Oh,
for nonprofit housing turnover? Just wondering if there's been any uptake.
No, I mean, I think I've been here, I don't know, I've been here probably about like a year and a half, and there's only been one application for that program since I've been here, and that was from John Feehan.
Okay. I just want to put a pin in that. We should probably think about how, unless there's been no turnover, nobody needs the money, but
Mhm.
I'm sure there are repairs and things that are needing to get done. And I know nonprofit budgets are really squeezed. So anyway, that's all. Sorry.
Yeah, maybe I will, when I touch base with the chief of staff, I will mention that program as well, and maybe just like a quick, media blast may just kind of remind people that that program is available.
Yep, that's a good one. That's, it's as timely as the rental assistance, I think.
Mhm, mhm.
yeah, so it sounds like applying to CPA for, for COVID-based, COVID-related rental assistance is something we should seriously consider.
Did we want to do a separate fund for general rental assistance? Did we talk about that? About, other issues outside of COVID that maybe we should have something?
I heard about somebody else today, if we had gobs of money, that would be something I would say would be a priority. I mean, people just not being able to pay the rent. And, like for instance, today I heard from somebody who wants to apply to one of the Minco properties and doesn't make enough money. Can't meet the 80% requirement. And I guess one of my reservations about that, maybe you guys know more than I do, would be qualifying people, unless we, use an agency who would, do all the financial checks and have to qualify.
Yeah, you'd have to still use Pettingill House or somebody. I mean, we
Right.
wouldn't have the capacity to do it.
Yep. But I hear about it a lot. I hear about it, just Sima Kittrick is always calling and contacting me, asking me if I knew of any resources.
We talked at one of our meetings when we were brainstorming about like down payment, not down payment, like first, last, and second. Oh my gosh, first and last and security. And we were talking about it in relationship to the Minco property, but we, came to the conclusion we can't have it specifically for a property. But, just sort of in general, what are the housing needs that folks might have? It might be something like that to get into a property, or it might be something to stay in a property. I mean, that does seem like, it's hard for people to afford to live in Newburyport. And if they're here, it's hard for them to stay, if they have a change in their income. So does seem like if we could have someone who could administer it for us, that might be a nice complement to our COVID programs. If we're already doing the COVID relief program, that this could be another layer to that to help folks who don't fit in that bucket somehow.
Did
Yes.
we, have we, I don't seem to recall we had some kind of a income qualified home improvement grant program at one time. Do you remember that?
Yeah, rehab, it's kind of like rehab grants.
Right,
I don't
yeah.
think they were income, it wasn't tied to income though necessarily, was it?
Yeah, I think it was.
It was CDBG money, I believe.
Yes, CDBG money.
Yeah, I mean, there are a million reasons, a million ways to spend this money. I think there's so much need at this point.
Oh, are you talking about the housing rehab program?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
Well,
think, I
it's-
actually touched base with the administrator the other day. I think they have about like 50,000 in CPA funds from years and years and years ago, and I don't think any of it has been spent.
Yeah, we need to do like a whole menu of
Mhm.
funds that are available for different folks for different reasons. Really kind of lift the work of this organization and of the housing and planning office.
Was there going to be an info session, like webinar type thing on housing trusts and CPA funds? And Judy, did you send something around? I guess I'm wondering if, as we envision submitting a new application to the CPC, if there's other ideas that other communities are doing that we could consider.
I think I sent that around. It was something MHP was doing. I think, Caitlin, you were going to try to attend it. I can't even remember now if it happened yet or it's happening.
There seems to be like almost like bi-monthly meetings. I know I attended a couple of them a couple months ago, but I was thinking perhaps I could put something together simple that kind of just lists all of the housing programs the city has. I mean, there are on our website, but maybe put together something and then just take a look at what funds we have available and somehow like just try and get the message out better.
That's a good idea.
So I don't think that would take too much work, and I'm happy to do that. And then maybe, add to that a potential, general rental assistance, program, I guess, if Pettingill is open to administering that, they have the capacity for that.
So if we decide to go to CPA for rental assistance, we could add into that pot the 75,000 from the home funds.
Mhm.
I mean, I like the idea of helping people with we help with down payment for an affordable
Right.
owner. I like the idea of helping with first and last month, security, whatever, to get someone into rental. They obviously have to have the income to sustain the rent, but a lot of times that upfront payment is what's hard for people to get in. So maybe the CPA application for that. And again, that's you'd have to ask Pettingill if they'd be willing to administer it.
So are we talking first and last month and general rental assistance?
Yeah, I mean, it wouldn't necessarily have to be first and last because it could be people who are already renting here and having a problem.
Right.
Sure.
Yes.
Yes.
Judy, so you and Caitlin had a meeting with Kevin Hurley, and he said that we can use the home funds for rental assistance here in Newburyport.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, we can.
Because with the home program, there's going to be a lot more baggage, I am assuming, than with the CPA funds. So there will be a lot of reporting and stuff like that. Did he talk about that?
Yeah,
We didn't really get into that level of detail, I don't recall.
He did talk about that, but he talked about that it could be used. And I know Pettingill said they were fine with adding, this money to the pot, but I think the qualifications are a little bit different. So when they would take in applications, they would have to see who qualified for what, because maybe, the people getting the home funds would be, having to meet like higher thresholds or lower thresholds. I forget what he said, to get that pot of money.
It would be good to understand what are the, requirements and reporting requirements and
Mhm.
stuff that come with this little pot of home dollars. I mean, I'm all for using those funds if possible, but we want to know what we're getting in for, because the home program, it can be very bureaucratic.
Yeah,
Right.
and if we can use some of the money for administrative costs. And I have a question, sort of, this is, forgive me if it's a stupid question, but once we're beyond COVID, hopefully, and say we do have a balance of rental assistance monies left, can we combine or move that to the general rental assistance program? Or
I would say, off the top of my head, I would say yes, because I mean, we made the decision to use, our unrestricted funds for COVID. So we could always make the decision to reallocate those funds to something else. Yeah,
okay, good. No, because there's some synergies here, right? So whatever we have, we can just move it and just have a nice permanent program. Okay.
right. Yes, good point. Yeah.
So the question is, should we be applying for CPA funds for this? And if so, for how much?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I think we should. I definitely think it's good use of our funds, of CPA money.
And how much? I have no idea how much to apply for.
What did we apply for last year? 150 for down payment assistance?
Yes.
150.
Do that again.
Yeah.
I mean, we usually get like half of what we apply for, so
Right.
plan it that way.
Well, we
Yeah.
want, I think we should get reimbursed for what we have already expended so far, right? For COVID relief.
Yes, that's true.
And it might be more by the time we submit our application. So, maybe it's going to be 50,000. And so then, if we want to continue the program, say COVID, I don't know, maybe, yeah, so maybe 150,000 would be appropriate, but we really maybe want to ask for more if we're going to get less than what we ask for. Because it seems to me that 150,000 might be what we need.
Yeah, I mean, last year we asked for the 150 and we got the 150.
We did get it last year.
Yeah, it really,
Depends
depends
how much there's in the pot, right?
how,
And
yeah,
who
what
else
the
is
other
asking for all that.
applications are.
Do
Yeah.
200 and that will replenish the 40,000. Right.
Right.
And, the Y might be requesting some funding for Hillside. So we might not be the only housing related application.
Right. Yeah, so if we did 200, probably by that time we'll have spent 50,000 on the COVID program. So we could say it would be for general rental assistance, including first and last month's rent. And we can point to the Minco project. I always forget the name of that project as a, it's a potential, a large number of, relatively large number of rental units coming online.
Online. Yeah.
Will the housing at Hillside that the Y is developing, will that require some security?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Good question. I don't know. I don't know what they do for security deposits. Yeah, and we should be able to, I would think we should be able to meet before the CPA application is due, beginning of January.
It's due February 4th.
Yeah.
I had selected January 21st as a date to meet. But but we can try and find one earlier if you'd like.
I need to.
For next meeting?
Yeah. That would give us a little bit of time just to go over the application before
Yeah.
the February 4th deadline.
Do you want to do it earlier on the 14th?
The 14th, we have a historical commission meeting.
Oh, okay,
It's like every other Thursday we have historical commission meetings, so
right.
gotta try and find an alternate Thursday.
Mm. Works for me.
21st.
The 21st?
The
Yeah.
20,
But maybe that's not,
That too soon to.
yeah,
put-
what about the first Thursday in January?
I actually have a rare work meeting that evening. But you could meet without me if I'm the only one who can't make it.
either works for me.
Yeah, either one works for me.
I have no plans. I was just thinking that
Oh,
I'm not
yeah.
traveling over the holidays. I was just thinking, it might be helpful to have a little more time
Yep.
before the CPA application is due. I mean, I feel like there might be some things to sort of think through in
Yeah,
terms of mechanics about, what are we trying to create here? How are we, with COVID, it's all supposed to be so temporary, right? Everything is, it just seems a little more focused than
true.
this rental assistance program, which I think is an interesting idea. But I just wonder if there's some aspects to it that we haven't thought through that we would want to be able to address in our application. I don't know if there are other communities that are administering this that we can learn from, how they structured it. Is it a one-time deal? Is it, I don't know. It's just,
Right. That's a good point. That's a good question.
And we also need to talk to Pettingill House because if they're not, I mean, I'm guessing they'll be willing, but if they're not willing, we kind of get back to square one.
Well, we can check with CAI. They might want to do it.
Sure.
it-
Well, I'm
Okay, so
fine.
you want to say January 7th? Does that work?
Yeah, why don't you plan to meet then and if I can join, I will. And if I can't, I won't.
Andy, did you have anything scheduled for that night? Any Zoom meetings?
I am okay right now.
Okay, good.
Yeah, and maybe Caitlin, you could look to see if there are other communities who are doing similar programs. You know,
Kevin Hurley might be able to.
Yeah, I was just going to say that. Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, sounded like he knew of communities that were doing it, at least with home funds. So
Can we get him as a guest speaker?
sure. I can work on that.
yeah, it's a good idea. Yeah. Good.
Do we have minutes?
Did you need to vote on that? Or are you going to hold off on voting until the next meeting?
Yeah, I think we probably should hold off on voting
Okay,
until we have the application nailed down.
okay. But I'll start working on it and trying to get some thoughts together for it.
Great. Yes, we do have meeting minutes. Do you have a motion?
We have 4. Is it? Oh, no, we have
The two of them,
2. Wait,
I-
oh,
I
yeah,
do-
2. Yeah.
I move to approve both sets of minutes.
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
All right.
I just wanted to say one little thing.
We spelled your name wrong. No.
I think it's the September 17th. I always make sure I read the things that I'm supposed to have said. And I think we were talking about the Wise development at Hillside. I'm looking at them right now. Yeah. I mean, the tenants have shared kitchen. They all have their own bathroom. I was asking about, with COVID, did they consider any design changes? A lot of group housing facilities are starting to rethink some of the shared living design. And John said, no, they're not changing the design. That's fine. It's just, I was quoted as saying that they're going to have shared bathrooms and kitchens, but they're going
Shared, so
that-
shared kitchens,
shared
yeah.
kitchens.
Yeah,
And,
I'll make that
and
edit.
I care about this because
Yeah.
I really encouraged him originally for everybody to have their own bathroom. So that's the only reason why.
Okay, I'll make that
something
edit,
that's
thank
near and
you.
dear to
Don't want
my
to be on the
heart.
record contradicting yourself.
Yeah.
Exactly. Thank you.
Yep.
Otherwise, I'm fine with them.
So I now move to approve the minutes as amended.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Great, excellent. So, and we have our next meeting date. And unless there's anything else, I think we're adjourned.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
Bye.
you. Good to
Bye.
see you all. Take care.
Happy
Bye.
holidays.
Yeah, that.
Okay.